Good afternoon. This is February 15th, 2022, the regular meeting of the Fairfield Harbor Management Commission. I'm Kim Taylor. With me here at Town Hall is Jack Hirschler, Jeff Stedman, Betty Gabriel. Members of the public on the line are Sam Cargill and Doug Metchik, and we're hoping that others check in as the meeting proceeds. Calling this meeting to order, and let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So, welcome everyone. The first order of business this afternoon is approving the minutes from the December 2021 meeting. All commissioners received them late last week. Are there any suggestions or corrections, or can I have a motion?
Betty,
Jack has raised his hand.
Did you make contact with the Harbor Master?
No.
Okay. So I believe that the Harbor Master report on the December minutes is not properly reflecting the Harbor Master's comment. So I believe
page 3.
Yeah, it relates to the North Anchorage report. It says in the minutes that online mooring will be processing the mooring permit applications for the North Anchorage, and our rules and procedures do not allow for that, and those are maintained by Pequot Yacht Club. So I believe that they are not maintained by that online mooring.
Got it. Do you want me to make that change, or do you want?
What's that?
Okay.
Those are maintained by Pequot Yacht Club and not by, under our rules, not by.
They don't go into this online mooring system at all?
No.
Okay, that
Because the boats assigned are determined on a night-by-night basis by Pequot Yacht Club under our rules, and that can't be done through online mooring. So that's why the Yacht Club has developed their own methodology that's approved by the Harbor Master. The tackle records for those moorings are maintained in the system, but that's the only part of the North Anchorage records that are in the system.
Okay, so we're talking about the December minutes, page 3.
Harbor Master report, yeah.
Harbor Master report.
I think it's just missing a notch, Eddie.
Got it.
But Harbor Master's on the line. It's just difficult to hear.
I'm here.
So I don't know if you have the minutes, and it sounds like you might be driving. The online mooring system will be processing mooring permit applications for vessels in the North Anchorage. It should say is not.
No, will not.
Not be.
Okay.
All right,
Will
so
not
on,
be.
it's page 2, not page
Yes.
3.
I'll make that change.
So are there any other changes or corrections? So with the exception of adding the not to the Harbor Master report in the second sentence, can I have a motion to accept the minutes as accepted? Jack's moving. Can I have a second?
Second, Cargill.
Thank you, Sam. All in favor?
Aye.
It was Doug, I think. Okay. Okay, the January minutes. These were circulated twice today, most recently at about 10 o'clock this morning to make a change as suggested by Don Hyman with his relationship to the
Former board member.
And that he was a former board member with what am I looking for? To the,
Aspetuck.
thank you, the Aspetuck Land Trust. And Betty has made that change, by Don. Any other questions, suggestions, suggested changes? If not, can I have a motion to accept them as presented at 10 o'clock this morning?
So moved.
Jack has moved.
This is Doug, second.
Thanks, Doug. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Minutes accepted and approved. Okay, moving right along. The chairman's report. Right after our meeting in January, I emailed Kelly and Stephen Panis expressing regret that at this time the commission is unable to, cannot provide approval to install a memorial bench in honor of their son at the Lower Wharf. On January 20th, Jeff Stedman and I met with Jim Bradley and Santiago Alfame, representing the Fair Country Club of Fairfield, to discuss the dredging project at the mouth of the channel. On January 20th, Jeff received and forwarded to me an email from Carl Soldado announcing that the Army Corps of Engineers has received $1.2 million in funding for the dredging of Southport Harbor. On January 25th, the commission received an email from RACE, which transmitted the COP issued by DEEP to the Country Club of Fairfield, allowing seawall repairs. And on February 1st, Jeff and I attended a WebEx meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers, several people from DEEP, again to discuss the dredging project at the mouth of the channel. And so that is my report. Brian Leclerc, the Harbor. Any questions? We'll be discussing the meeting with the Army Corps later on the agenda. Brian Leclerc, Harbor Master report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, it's Brian Leclerc. Renewals are going well. As of about 15 minutes ago, for the mooring permits in the harbor, there have been 63 individuals who have had their permits renewed. There are 10 that are currently under review. Those are all partially complete. They await various documentation, whether it be a safe boating certificate for a class that is upcoming this month or next month, or a registration or an insurance document. Those are all partially completed. And there are only 5 that are incomplete, meaning individuals who have not done anything, not responded or submitted any documents. I'll be calling all of them since they've just received the February 15th final reminder. I'm going to make personal calls to all of them to see if they want to just let their moorings go or if there's a reason. Right now we have 4 and I believe 5 moorings available to assign out this year to new individuals off the waiting list. That said, we may lose 1 or 2, as you know, because of the encroachment. So we're at least going to get, I would say, 2 to 3 people off the list so far. 58 individuals that have paid $10 and renewed their position on the waiting list. There are 6 that I have under review that I've reached out to because they've indicated they were renewing but did not have their $10 in. And there are 13 who have not responded. As to the North Anchorage, Pequot has tendered payment for the 51 moorings, as you know, and those are not going through the system. That's a separate documentation process we're arranging with Fairweather, not Fairweather, Pequot, sorry, Jack from Pequot. So that is essentially my report. We had one glitch in the system I caught last week, that an individual renewed and his mooring switched to a different location than where he was last year, and that where he was when I did a manual printout of the list. Before this started on January 1, I printed a waiting list and the current assignment list for the people that would be just been doubled online to make sure there are no issues. And there was one glitch. They cannot explain what happened or why it happened, but it has only happened once, and they're still looking into it to try to figure out what is going on. But other than that, the system's working fine. Most people are compliant and cooperative. There's probably been a dozen folks that have had trouble scanning documents, so I've just taken care of that, assisting them, and there are a few that have dropped off documents at my office or at Town Hall, and we've scanned them in and processed their checks accordingly. So, no issues right now.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Any questions for the Harbor Master? No questions for the Harbor Master? Okay. Thanks, Brian, very much. We are now to the presentation by Jeff Stedman, the Southport Harbor Historic Navigation Project on the Connecticut coast. For those of you who are not with us, and who have received the agenda, the presentation is embedded in the agenda. For those of you who would like to take a look at it separately, it is also on the Harbor Commission website. If you go to the website on the home page, to the right, on the right side, there is a tab that says Files and Documents. If you click on the Files and Documents tab, there will be a drop-down menu, and it is under the drop-down menu that we have, that is the presentation is posted right there. So, no further ado, Jeff Stedman.
Well, thank you, Kim. And maybe we'll say it's not just my presentation, it's the Commission's presentation, and it's been developed over the last several months. And it's one of three, I guess you call them PowerPoint presentations that we put together. There's a larger presentation on the history of the Harbor Management Commission and the Harbor Management Plan that we prepared as part of the update process to the plan. We also have a presentation presenting the results of our public survey, public opinion or attitude or input survey that's also on the website. And one of the things that was a result of the public opinion survey is that everybody recognizes the importance of maintenance dredging at the mouth of the harbor. And as a priority of the Commission, this probably is the number one priority, to work with the Army Corps to maintain the full width of the Federal Navigation Channel at the mouth of the harbor. So as we're working to develop this information, and Don and Doug have made very thoughtful comments, including one that right up front we should explain why we're doing this. And so that second slide explains that we're doing this this presentation in the course of working with the Army Corps of Engineers to develop a plan for maintenance dredging of what we're calling that area of critical concern, which is where the sand has overtopped the jetty over many years. And as part of our process, the Army Corps of Engineers asked us to help them research certain historical bits of information that we talk about in these slides. And this has been provided to the Corps of Engineers and discussed with them. So the purpose right up front is to provide this information on the history of dredging, the history of, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, of the Federal Navigation Project in Southport Harbor, which we've talked about as one of the earliest federal navigation projects authorized by the U.S. Congress in the United States. So the history of it is, at least in our opinion, is quite fascinating. So the introductory slides, we know where we are in Connecticut, but significance of the coastal location, being within the coastal area of Connecticut, makes us subject to, if that's the right word, up to the policies of the Connecticut Coastal Management Act. And that act supports what we're working on with the Corps, because it's a state policy to maintain federal navigation projects for the purpose of safe navigation and public access. And of course, we know the importance of Southport Harbor in the history of the town, and the Harbor Commission has the principal responsibility for managing the use of the harbor, and that goes back to 1986 with the ordinance that created the Harbor Commission. And of course, the historic maritime community that is Southport, which is also very interesting from the late 1700s to the early into the 1800s. The significance of Southport as a port on the Connecticut coast, and is described in a number of publications in terms of the population and the amount of goods that were transported in and out of Southport. It's like the most significant port in terms per capita between New York and Boston in the late 1700s and early 1800s, which is quite interesting. And you know, just repeating what's written on the slide, but when we review the history of navigation improvements in Southport, you know, we talk not just about the history of Southport, but we talk about and learn about the navigation history of the United States and how these projects came about and how they're managed. And the first navigation improvements were in 1825, and there were 3 beacons that were authorized to provide guidance into the harbor. And that was an 1825 Act of Congress. The drawing that we used here is actually from an 1826 survey map. And by 1827, when the survey map was published, based on an 1826 survey, the beacons were already in place. So they were put in place pretty quickly. And I think someone asked a question, I tried to find the answer. How were these lighted back then? And we look back into some of the historical records, and it was at that time in history, and I don't know a whole lot about it, it was either vegetable or animal oil that lighted navigation beacons. But anyway, I shouldn't talk about that because I don't know a whole lot about it. So the beacons were constructed, and you can see I've noted the location on that 1827 survey map, but they're not considered part of the Federal Navigation Project because they're not managed and maintained by the Army back then. They were maintained by whatever organization was the precursor to the Coast Guard, as they are now. So they were not part of the original of the first navigation improvement, and they were constructed on land that was deeded by the state of Connecticut to the federal government. We talk about that later on because that process applies to the navigation structures. This drawing, or sketch, it's from a really wonderful book, 1836 book by John Warner Barber that talks about all of the towns in Connecticut, and there's sketches that he did in here. So you can see this artist's rendering, if that's what you call it, of townspeople at the mouth of Southport Harbor, and the logs that are there vertically. That was the first jetty, because even back then the sand was moving from east to west and accumulating in the channel. So the first attempt to try to block that sand was putting those and it's sort of interesting. We're doing the same thing now. We're thinking about how to maintain the entrance to the channel. So in 1826, there was a survey that the Corps. This is the first survey map that we could find. Maybe there was previous surveys, but this was the first survey by the Army topographical engineers, recognizing the importance of the port and trying to come up with a plan to maintain the beneficial use of Southport Harbor. And what they did when they did this survey is they came up with plans for what they call the breakwater, which is the jetty, and the dike, which, as they formally referred to it, which is the wall along the east side of the harbor. So they came up with being the Army Topographical Engineers, came up with a plan for maintaining the harbor. And then the process that was followed is most interesting, because and we have these documents that we received from the National Archives and also from the State Library. So it began with the 1829 Act of Congress, which authorized the construction of the jetty and the harbor wall. And when we look at this, and the Corps of Engineers, and if I'm going on too long, tell me to quicken up. But the Corps of Engineers provided us with a list of all the federal navigation projects in New England. And so this is the third navigation project that was authorized by Congress in Connecticut, behind Stonington Harbor and something in the Saugatuck River, which I can't quite figure out, and the 10th earliest in all of New England. And that makes it probably the 10th earliest in all of the United States, or at least close to it. So it began with this act of Congress, and this is a contemporary photo, but all this work would take place in what's known as the public trust area of the state. It's the tidelands and the lands and waters that are waterward of mean-high water, which are in effect held in trust by the state for the benefit of the public. So even though there was a federal act authorizing the construction of the wall and the jetty, the federal government to build those works needed the property interest, if that's the right word, from the state of Connecticut to do it. And that's a principle that's held throughout Connecticut. So following the federal act, pretty quickly after that, I'd say the federal act was in March. In May, there was a special act of the legislature referring to the act of Congress passed in March, which authorized the building of the dike. And then the Senate and the House of Representatives passed this special act, whereby the governor is authorized and empowered to cede the jurisdiction of this state over the said dike and seawall and over all territories and waters which shall be within 3 rods of said work. 3 rods is like 16 feet, thereabouts. Said work, respectively, to the United States by deed of cession. So the first thing was the federal act in 1829, then the special act of the legislature a few months later authorizing the governor to give that underwater land and tidelands to the federal government. And then we have, interestingly, the governor's actions to do just that. And some years ago when we searched for this, they weren't digitized, but now all these old records of the governor going back to, well, as long as there were governors, are digitized, and the state library helped us, provided these to us. So then the governor then, as authorized by the state legislature, ceded the jurisdiction of the state over the underwater tidelands necessary to build the wall and the jetty. And interestingly, it was Governor Gideon Tomlinson, whose history in Fairfield is quite well known. And then these are some historical views of the jetty that we got from the Pequot Library. And again, the purpose of the jetty, just the same as with those logs that were put into the sand vertically, is to block the movement of sand from east to west, the natural movement of sand into the mouth of the harbor. And the purpose of the wall was, and you'll see this in a bit, but where the country club of Fairfield is now, that area was all marshland, or mostly marshland. So the wall was for the purpose of directing the flow of the river into the main part of the harbor and to help channelize the harbor and maintain the depth, rather than having it diverse, spread out over the marshes. So these are this is 1888. I believe that the works were completed by 1837. And we have all these documents, reports from the Corps of Engineers, annual reports, which themselves are quite fascinating. But you can see for this picture, the beacons, this is significant too. There's 2 beacons here now. This was the outer beacon, The middle beacon that was constructed before any of these other works started was where the jetty the jetty ended, and the beacon that was closest to shore was at the point where the jetty bends. So that closest to shore beacon was eliminated.
So Jeff, just to be clear, from the late 1820s to the creation of the Country Club of Fairfield, all of that swampy area to the east of the wall just existed like that for the purposes of maintaining as much depth as possible in the harbor itself.
Let me show, I think I have a better map later on. So I jumped ahead a little bit, but this is all that land, tidelands and marshlands to the east of where the wall was built. That was known on the surveys as the sunken ground. That was the term that was used for it. So prior to the construction of the wall, when the Mill River came down, it might disperse out into the marsh, but the wall was meant to sort of, they call it train the river, but focus the flow, into the main part of the harbor. And then the harbor jetty, you can see, jumping ahead a little bit here, but the purpose was to block the movement of sand into the harbor, but in recent times it hasn't been providing that purpose because it hasn't been managed. You could argue properly, but the jetty's purpose, going back to the early 1800s, was to block that movement of sand, to catch it against the vertical wall. It hasn't been maintained, so it doesn't function that way anymore. And then the purpose of the wall was to channelize the river, the flow. A couple of other views of the sunken ground. You can see it behind the wall, the wetlands. These old photos, and here's a better picture, looking up towards where Sasko Hill Road is up there. But this is the upstream limit of where the wall was built. Another thing, here's the written purpose: to compel the water, which at the flood tides flow eastward into the low ground north of the sand pit, to all pass around its north end and thus increase the scouring action of the current on the main channel. These old pictures from the Pequot Library are quite good. So when the wall and the jetty were built, then there were only two beacons, the middle and the outer, as I said, and where the inner beacon was, that was removed. It became the bend where its position was the bend in the breakwater, bend in the jetty. Now we talk that those are the jetty and the wall are part of the federal navigation improvements, but so were authorized channels going back back to the early 1800s. And prior to the federal authorizations, it was interesting that the reports describe dredging being undertaken by the townspeople using road scrapers at low tide, pulled by oxen. And they were able to provide a channel of about 2 feet at low water, which is interesting. But then, so by 1870, the channel was still only 2 feet at low water, and the Corps of it, the federal government authorized the improvement of the channel. And you can see this is an 1896 harbor survey, so that was authorized in 1878. And the channel, they call it a bifurcated channel, which splits up here towards, the lower part of Perry Green, and the other part came up to where the yacht club is now. And that was authorized at 4 feet deep. Here's another view of the 1905 channel drawing. We were able to assemble all of these, or I don't know that they are all, but what seems to be most of these old federal surveys from the Corps of Engineers archives. And then another significant part was when the Country Club of Fairfield was incorporated, and then received permission from the state of Connecticut and the Federal Corps of Engineers to dredge material from the harbor and from offshore, in the nearshore area, to create to serve as fill for creation of the golf course. And I believe that the special act authorizing the club to dredge was 1915, and the dredging took place in 1916. But we have the documents from the Corps of Engineers about that too. And when the country club dredged, and they took material from the main part of the harbor, they also deepened the harbor for navigation and essentially filled in the area between, or not filled in, dug out the area between the two bifurcated channels and used that for landfill. So that was another significant, and the Corps of Engineers records show that almost 1 million cubic yards of fill was dredged from the harbor here and then offshore in this area. And that filled the sunken ground and created the golf course that opened in 1921. And the other thing that we did, and I can't show all of show this one, is to show, it's very interesting to see how the shoreline has changed from the early 1800s before the wall was built and what it is now. And so by some of the reference points that we used, and this isn't done to engineering or design standards, but it's pretty close. We could overlay and match the points of the three beacons, because those stay the same from 1827 to this map here, to the current day. And the location of the inner beacon is the bend in the jetty. And then the other things that were very clear is on the shoreline was where White's Rock is. That was shown on the Corps survey in 1827 map of the 1826 survey. And also the lower wharf was in place then. So we could come up with a pretty good overlay to show the change of the shoreline. And you can see how that barrier spit was a good distance inland than it is now. And of course, it built out once the jetty was built to accumulate the sand against the jetty. So looking at the shoreline changes is quite interesting.
Going up to the slide just before that, the 1934, the one just previous to this, no overflow.
Oh, yes. Right. And then you can go up to, we have these aerial photos too. So that this was the first aerial survey of the state of Connecticut, which is interesting in its own right. But the 1960, I think the dredging prior to our dredging in 2004 and 2005 was 1960, and there was little there was no sand accumulation to speak of at that time. So it was between then and 2004 and 5 that's the sand accumulated on.
This is what it's supposed to look like, though.
Yeah. The shoreline change is quite interesting. And so now, 2022, there's a federal navigation project still in Southport Harbor. Responsibility for maintenance lies with the Army Corps of Engineers. Local responsibility for managing the navigation project in accordance with the Corps' open to all on equal terms policy is with the Harbor Management Commission. And we're working with the Corps to finally try to reach a long-term solution to the sand at the mouth of the harbor. So we're proposing and also the other thing that we did is for the Corps of Engineers, which is to document the recent history of the dredging operations. So in the lower photo on the right, in 2004 and 2005, this was after the Harbor Management Plan was adopted, and we received the Corps receive federal money from Congress, which was authorized through the earmark process, not the Corps' budget process, to maintain the whole harbor, maintenance dredge the whole harbor. But we were not able to maintain or dredge the entire 100-foot width of the entrance channel because of the encroaching sand, and because on the top of the sand we're growing a grass species is protected in Connecticut, and then subsequent to that, the endangered bird species nested on it. So in 2004 and 2005, the Corps of Engineers dredged the entire harbor and placed the material in a disposal site in Long Island Sound. At the same time, the town's Public Works Department excavated sand from the side slope of the channel in that big sand buildup and used that for nourishing town beaches. And we did that because we needed to protect, as directed by DEEP, which gives the permit to do this. We needed to protect those grasses on the top of the sandbar. And so instead of just dredging through by the Corps of Engineers, the town, in effect, did it more precisely on the side slope. Then in that upper picture, the town came back in 2014 and dredged additional sand, but again, not from the full 100-foot width, just to dredge sand out that it encroached into the 75-foot width that the DEP had allowed us to dredge. And then, I don't know where I got this cartoon, but it's from 1926, from the Fairfield News, and if you read it, it's quite interesting. It's asking Uncle Sam to dredge the harbor, and he says, not now. And, well, maybe now that we do have a chance, because as Kim mentioned, the Corps of Engineers has received $1.287 million for this project, and we think that we've designed, or we're designing a project that is feasible to achieve, and I'll mention that in a bit. So we're planning for maintenance dredging now of that restore the 100-foot wide channel, but to do it, we wouldn't use a bucket dredge. The Corps would use its own hydraulic dredge, which has a hopper in it, and it brings the sand up into the hopper, sucks it up, and we would take I keep saying we, but you know, the Corps, the vessel would go a short distance offshore and disperse it, the sand, in an area that's been identified and tested, and the purpose of doing that would be to do a pilot project to study possible means of enhancing oyster habitat, which apparently oysters grow better on coarser material. And the area that we would disperse this in has been identified by the Bureau of Aquaculture and was agreed to by the Shellfish Commission a few years ago. So this money, this $1.2+ million would go towards the operation of the Corps' hopper dredge, the name of which is the Currituck. It's a quite interesting bit of equipment. But at the same time, again, to be more precise on the side slope to protect the plants, there would be a need for excavating equipment to create the proper side slope so as not to undermine the plants on the top of the sandbar. And the Corps of Engineers would do that itself. So that's, and I say to be continued, which of course, hopefully, it will be. But we've had a good meeting with there are questions now that have to be addressed, and of course, we need to work cooperatively as we have in the past, both of those past dredging projects with the Country Club of Fairfield to get access to the sandbar. And in fact, when we talk with the Corps, you remember I mentioned that the authorization of the transfer of the underwater lands to the federal government was for a distance of 4 rods, or 3 rods on each side of the base of the wall and the jetty. And the Corps assumes that was for access for maintenance, in the maintenance to get to their structures to maintain it in the future. So we have things to work out with the Country Club and with DEEP, because we have to provide assurances that we're not going to damage or destroy the grasses, and we're going to have to mitigate any adverse impacts on the piping plover habitat, which is sand that's flat and not vegetated. So I'm talking a lot, but there's so much more we could talk about with this. But the main purpose of doing this was to talk about the history of this and get those historical documents from the state library, which the Corps of Engineers had asked us to assist with. And now they're preparing finalizing their plan and preparing an environmental assessment, which is the document required of any federal action to show what the environmental impacts are. And we'll be assisting them with the helping them figure out how to avoid the impacts on the plants, which they think they'll be able to do. So thank you for letting me go on about this.
Jeff,
so long.
that is great.
And we also, on the website at the beginning and at the end, people see this on the website and they have any questions, if they could contact the commission and transmit their questions to the commission.
Absolutely.
And we'll keep updating people as we go along.
Fabulous, Jeff, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Jeff about the presentation? Members of the public, any questions to Jeff about the presentation?
No, thank you.
Okay. All righty. Moving right along. That's really been great, Jeff. Thank you. We have no new applications, but we have back to old business, the Lower Wharf. Jeff?
No, we have some work to do. We haven't gotten the material that requested by the finance department, Betty. I forget, is it the finance department?
Yeah.
On the history of the grant. So
yeah.
Is it the finance department?
Yeah.
We have to do that by the end of this week, so that we can go through the formalities of repurposing the grant that was originally provided for dredging. Not the dredging project we just talked about, but the dredging around the Lower Wharf and the town boatyard, and repurpose that for just working on the Lower Wharf, the elevated pier and the wall. So
we're on that.
Yeah,
we're on that.
I've delayed in getting that together, although I've been working on it.
Sand management? This is sand management.
And that's tied up with what we were just talking about.
Right.
So all of this work that we put into working with the Corps of Engineers on the dredging project, in addition to we talked about this with two major parts to it. The Corps of Engineers is proceeding to develop a plan for maintaining the channel, dredging the sand, from the 100-foot wide channel. But the other part of it is, what can we do to manage the sand to try to slow down the movement of sand over the jetty in the future? How best to manage that sand? So that's the second part of this effort, which is, and that's really why we got to this point, because between 1960 and now, there hasn't been that effort to do that. So that's the other part of our project, the sand management part. And once we can reach agreement on that, and we can put that into the revised, updated harbor management plan, that institutionalizes this approach to managing the harbor, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to get permission from DEEP, sooner rather than later, because it's part of the harbor management plan. How we intend to manage that sand. The sand that's over top the jetty.
Right, great, thank you. Any questions for Jeff? Lower Wharf or sand management? Okay, moving right along. Bill, are you there to report on the mooring committee meeting? Bill? No, Bill. Okay. Well, we'll hear double from the mooring committee at our next meeting. I think most of what Brian reported was discussed
There was the discussion about the USGS.
Right, and we'll do that. Okay, plan update. The committee has not met. We will plan a meeting soon. Status and scope of AHMC's responsibility for Lower Wharf. Don and Sam, I'm not sure if you've done anything. I have not heard from the town attorney.
No, I have done nothing. We should have something to report next month.
Okay.
And I think the last item, you want me to present the HMC budget, and just to, do I just go to the first select woman and do it that way, or how would you like me, or what I need to do?
We usually get notified about when they'd like us to come in. So we've not heard from them yet, Sam, but when we do, we will pass it along to you.
No problem.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a bit of new business. Brian, I hope you're still with us. The U.S. Geological Survey has told us that they wish to install a buoy in the mouth of the harbor to monitor water quality. And over the course of the last couple of weeks, they have changed their minds about where they wanted that buoy to go a couple of times, and I think also changed the length of the chain that they were going to use to hold the buoy in place. And Brian is up on the latest, so Brian, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As we discussed at the Mooring Committee last week, the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, sent documentation to me indicating that they were interested in placing a water quality monitoring buoy structure to take Sasko watershed water quality samples at the surface and at the bottom. This is one of a number of buoys that they're in the process of putting in. It's a 2-year monitoring cycle that's likely to start in April. They sent preliminary drawings to me along with a note saying, how should this be reviewed? And is the chief executive of the town, the first select woman, signing off, or is she going to designate someone else to sign off on the DEEP application? So the USGS is applying to both the Coast Guard and the DEEP for permission to install the buoy. So I went back and forth a little bit with them. There was a mistake on the original drawing about the scope of the structure. It has 2 mooring-type buoys with on the either side of a central yellow buoy that has all the solar panels, antennas, satellite dishes, and monitoring equipment connected to it. Well, they had the original location sitting in the channel between can 9 and 11, just before the bend coming in. So we discussed last week, and I have to thank Mr. Stedman and Mr. Engord for a great discussion and information regarding that location, the bottom, the nature of the anchors they were using to hold this, and alternative locations. And after that meeting, it became clear to me that it is the west side of the channel that's the more appropriate location. It's out of the way. No boats should be going over where they're placing it between 9 and 11 because the water at low tide is close to a foot or less right in that area. So no keel boats. None of the boats from Pequot should be going over there. The kids' boats, the small ideals, racing it was too shallow. So on the east side, there is a little bit of deep water, and that is a spot where boats can stop and fish. So the west side was the better location. Well, they've been going back and forth as recently as a few hours ago. They told me that, in fact, they had it fully raised up the flagpole at the USGS, and one of the superiors there decided the right side, the east of the channel, actually would be better. And I pointed out that I don't think that's what our thoughts were. I'd be talking to you folks about it tonight. I believe the west would probably be better. And our main concerns were this thing straying into the channel. And that I did not want to have to order them or have the Coast Guard order them to remove it or move it myself because it's in the way of the channel. And they appreciated that. They said that's often a concern, and that they were looking very closely at the scope to keep precisely that from happening. And they were going to go back and look again at the west side between 9 and 11. Again, it's a illuminated mark. It's going to have a yellow flashing light. It's yellow in color. And it would be in an area where really you shouldn't be taking your boats coming into the harbor. It's just too shallow for just about all the boats straying over there. So as of right now, when I presented this to the first select woman and inquired whether she wanted to authorize me as harbor master to do the ultimate sign-off after we vetted this with the Harbor Management Commission, she referred it to Mr. Tim Bishop, who's our new conservation director, asking him to discuss this with the Conservation Commission and the Shellfish Commission. As of this morning, he responded that really it's the Shellfish Commission, essentially, not the Conservation Commission, because we're out in the Sound. And he did not see any issues with the Shellfish Commission or any concerns on their part, and I'm paraphrasing. So at this point, I'd be open to discussion with you folks as to whether you agree that the location between Green 9 and 11 on the west side, and that's depicted on the drawings you've seen, would be appropriate. And when we get the final plans, assuming it is in that area, I'll circulate them to you, as well as to Mr. Bishop. He can have a final look at it regarding the Shellfish Commission, and then we'll inquire again at the first select woman who's going to sign off on this, because someone on behalf of the town needs to sign off on the ultimate application they're submitting to DEEP. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts on placing it in this area?
So, Brian, they are now, the latest plan is somewhere on the west side between buoy 9 and 11. We don't know exactly where.
Well, it was this morning, and then this afternoon they came back and said, no, one of the superiors thinks the east side is better. And I said, well, no, we looked at that, and that's not necessarily good, because as we spoke at the mooring committee last week, there's a deeper spot of water there where boats will anchor to go fishing, and that could be a bit problematic, being on that side of the channel. So I said I'd really rather you look at the west side. It's shallow in the whole area. He said we'd like to bring it a little bit closer toward 9, bring it back out closer to 9, and a little bit away from the channel, because they did not want to interfere at all with the channel and come even close to the channel. So I'm still waiting for the final location. They gave us some longitude and latitude, but I'm waiting for the final bearings, longitude, latitude, so we can go out and take some bearings from shore and plot its location. And I was going to talk about Mr. Stedman with that once we have their final thoughts on where they want this.
Okay, so this is, we don't know the final location. We expect that this will be in place for 2 years.
Correct.
Correct?
That's correct.
And do they need anything from us? Does Brenda need anything from us?
Good question. I mean, they want a signature from someone at the town, the chief executive or her designee, consenting to this application being filed with DEEP. And they typically send them to the harbor masters because we or our commissions have the most interest and knowledge of the harbors and the management area as to whether this is an appropriate location for this. And I would think that as long as we are in an area out of the channel, obviously, and in that shallow water between 9 and 11, where, as we discussed at the mooring committee, it's really not in the way of sailing interest, boating interest, or anyone going in and out of the channel. It's probably a good location for the structure.
So commissioners who are on the phone, any concerns, any thoughts about a water quality buoy on the west side of the channel between 9 and 11?
I defer to Brian and town's conservation people, but I totally agree with the logic. I mean, the east side was still be plenty of recreational activity, depending on what tide, and the opportunity for it to float into the channel. So I think it's all reasonable. That's just my view.
Thanks, Sam. Anybody else have a thought that they'd like to express, commissioners?
Well, this is Doug. I'll echo that view. I think, in general, I think this is a good idea. It's difficult from the phone. I'm not sure if there were visuals in the room to actually visualize the location, but I would defer to the commissioners who were there and the ones who are driving this to land on an appropriate location.
Well, the only visual we have, Doug, is the copy of the map that we received from the USGS. It was circulated as part with the agenda, and it really just has a couple of orange bubbles right near the markings for the buoys. So I don't, and as Brian was saying, we don't really have an exact location yet. it would be somewhere on the west side of the channel between 9 and 11. So that's about as accurate as any of us.
Brian, do you have a sense from your conversations how wide this combination of buoys is going to end up being? I understand it's going to be outside just of the channel, but how wide is the overall width, I guess is the way to describe it? Got the central technology-based buoy, and then it's got these two outriggers, I guess, you know. How wide is overall is the whole section?
The original drawing had it as 40 feet wide, which I questioned because that seemed excessive, and they clarified that it's 10 feet between each of the, call them outrigger buoys, the center buoy. So it should be 20 feet plus the half the dimension of each buoy plus the dimension of the center buoy. So 25 feet perhaps.
Right, the center thing is big, right? The center thing is a technology-based buoy for monitoring with solar panels and transmission information, yeah. So it's not small.
Standard structure apparently they use. And it's going to have a flashing yellow light on it, by the way, as well.
It's going to look like Sputnik.
Yeah.
There's going to be an extra guide coming into the channel. You'll have the green, and then you'll have the red and the yellow on each side of you coming in at nighttime.
And 2 years.
This is one of us. 2 years. Yep.
So is there any? I'm sorry, Brian. So we know it's for 2 years, and the only question is where they're going to place it, not the size of it.
Right.
Correct.
Is there any? Are they sure that it's going to be that big? Is there any? Can we have any discussion with them about the size of it?
We can discuss. It's my understanding that's the standard configuration they use for these structures. For I don't know what the reason is. I can question them why they need those outrigger buoys, what the purpose is. I know that if you look at the design of it, and because they are putting these in somewhat shallow water, there are two mushrooms. I think it's 100 or 150 pounds each on the outrigger buoys, as well as a different anchoring. And if Jeff Engberg's there, he knows the name. I'm drawing a blank as to the central anchor device that is used on the yellow structure itself. It's not a mushroom; it's a different type of anchor.
So Jeff Engberg is here with us. Jeff, did you?
I believe it was a pyramid anchor.
Yeah, I'm stopping now so I can look at the drawing, which I have here, and I can tell you what it's a.
While you're looking at that drawing, and while Jeff is looking at the drawing too, my question is there any opportunity for us to get the reports from the monitoring?
Oh, I can inquire. Yes, each of the outriggers has a mushroom, a 100-pound mushroom. The middle has the SONDE, they call it. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. With a 35-pound anchor in the center.
Pyramid? Okay.
Yeah, 35-pound pyramid.
Is that what it's a pyramid device? Yeah. I'm not sure what you call the pyramid.
So
I think once it gets installed, there's going to be a notice to Mariner update from the Coast Guard if it's going to be a new device. It's outside of the channel. I don't see that. I mean, there's beneficial reason for doing this. I don't think we should object. It would be nice to know how big overall this thing is going to be, but it's not in an area, as other commissioners have said, that should interfere with the small boats or even the big boats.
Right, or any kind of traffic.
Right.
Okay. So Brian,
and actually, Madam Chairman, I just got while I was driving, I heard the phone go off 5 minutes ago on this call. I picked up my Harbor Master phone, and here's an update from the USGS from David Armstrong from the New England Water Science Center up in Massachusetts. He indicated, thanks for the call today and all the legwork you've done to talk to the Commission, Select Woman, Conservation, Shellfish, and Mooring Committee. I spoke to John Morrison and Brittany Isbicki after our call, and they are fine with the location we discussed between Green Can 9 and 11 to the west side and outside of the navigation channel. I've revised the slides to show this location on the map and Google Earth photos attached. Let me know your decision on this proposed location. Thanks for working with us, and it's the USGS. And Lulu just came in, and let me see if I can see where they are. Their updated map. They show the X on the west side. I think let me see if I can see okay, they've got, well, I can give you the longitude and latitude. It's actually dead center between 9 and 11 is where they're putting it, where it's proposed right now.
Okay, dead center between 9 and 11, outside the channel,
40 feet wide.
40 feet wide, and
Yellow light.
and we would like the information.
20 feet, not 40 feet. Now it's 20, however big the center float is, whatever the center float is. Say it's 5 feet, so 25 feet, I would suppose. It looks to be about that big.
So 25 feet wide, between 9 and 11, west side of the channel. When would they install it?
They told me April is when they want to get this up and operational.
Okay, and will they report
I do have
to us?
dimensions. And I can tell you the dimensions, Madam Chairman. I now have them. It's 24 inches wide, so the buoy hull, the center buoy is 24 inches wide, 14 inches tall, and the solar panels are 13 inches above that. So the whole height of the entire float and solar panels is 27.5 inches, it would appear.
Okay, so, and they're asking you to sign off?
Well, they're asking someone from the town, someone on behalf of the town, to sign off on their application to DEEP. Whether it's me or the first select woman, I have to follow up with her because she did not answer that question. She sent it over to Conservation and Shellfish to opine. So one of us will have to sign off. Either I as her designee or she can sign off on it.
Okay, and do you think it will be possible to get information, the information that they gather, or some of the information that they gather about the water quality?
I believe so. I had that preliminary discussion, and I will follow up with them about that, but I believe so.
Would that not be a condition of the harbor master's approval, that the report be provided to the Harbor Management Commission concerning the data and the implications for water quality management in Southport?
Did you hear that, Brian?
Yes, I can make that a condition that they provide the data. I would assume it's data we can make use of, or that would make sense to us, but yes.
I think they would have to provide a report explaining, not just the raw data,
Right.
but a presentation.
What does the data mean? What does it mean?
Right. What are we looking at? What are they seeing?
And would a permit from the harbor master be necessary to place these anchors? No. The state statute says that no mooring shall be placed in the harbor without a permit from the harbor master. That's the state statute. But then we have to look and see how we define mooring in the code and in the rules and procedures. I'm wondering if placement of an anchor like this, if it was mooring tackle, should be subject to a permit from the harbor master, as well as the state and federal permits.
I don't recall that the rules and procedures specifically address a non-vessel attaching mooring tackle. So this is for scientific data collection. I don't know.
What do you think, Ryan? Do they need a permit from
interesting.
you?
I will have that conversation. I have to think about that a little bit. That's a good question because then it's good question. They may actually because it's in the harbor management area. It is no different than a mooring. It's a mooring for a scientific instrument that's floating.
Right,
No different than a boat floating, and I have the same concerns. We can't have this thing break loose because the scope is wrong or get all twisted up on itself because they've got two anchors and the winds shift in that area or the tides. We can't have this thing moving around into the channel, clearly.
Right. Right.
Can't hurt.
It can't hurt, yeah.
Right, I agree. I will just ask them to get permission from me. So this way we can have the data.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, thanks, Brian.
So would you authorize me, if it's acceptable to me, and I will circulate, of course, to both Jeffs and the chairwoman, the final drawings that I just got here to see if anyone opines, and hearing no objection to recommend the first woman that one of us sign off on this?
Yeah, there should be a motion, right, Kim?
Yep, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you prepared to make it, Sam?
I know that there's others that would be willing to do it.
Like who?
Okay, fine. The motion this is a motion for the location for the USGS water quality buoy on the west side of the channel between markers 9 and 11. And I guess it's.
I have probably a motion, if I may suggest, Madam Chairwoman. Perhaps the motion should be that the Harbor Management Commission recommends to the first select woman that she or her designee execute on behalf of the town of Fairfield the USGS application to the Connecticut DEEP for the installation of a water monitoring buoy structure to the west of the channel into Southport Harbor in the Harbor Management Commission's area of jurisdiction at such location as agreed to by the harbor master.
Okay, with the conditions that we will get a report and that the harbor master will examine whether or not he needs to issue a permit.
Correct. And I will also, before I give that consent, circulate to you, Madam Chairman, and Jeff Engborg and Jeff Stedman, the final drawings that literally just came in a few minutes ago to look at. So I will consult with you on that before we give any consent.
So, Brian, I don't think you can make that motion.
I'm not making it. I just suggested
Yeah,
that
I
might
think
be
we
the
need
motion.
Sam to make that motion.
Oh. All right, hold on.
But you could say, the motion, since we're recording it, it could be the motion as
It's a record. That's the motion if it's recorded, right, Betty? Can we do that?
Yes.
I'll second that motion.
So Sam.
And then I will. Yes. So moved, and then someone seconded.
Yes, Sam moved, and Jack seconded it, and all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, motion passed. Thank you, everyone, for that. Do we have any other new business this evening? Oh, Bill Peregrini just came in. We have a mooring committee report. Thank you, Bill.
Yes, so we convened on last Tuesday, February 8th at 5:39 p.m. And the harbor master gave his report on the number of moorings successfully renewed. It was 61 of 82. There were 11 incomplete, 6 that did not respond, and 4 or 5 pending. In terms of the waiting list, 54 were committed and paid, 5 were under review, 19 did not responded. He also gave the report on the USGS positioning, as we just discussed, relative to the buoy that's going to monitor the water quality in the harbor. And we also briefly discussed whether the first select woman or a designee would weigh in on making those determinations or submitting
the deed. I think that is about it. Yeah, so that was the essence of our mooring committee meeting last Tuesday. And we adjourned at I think at roughly 6:30.
Super, thank you for standing in for Jack,
Yes, I appreciate it.
for that meeting. Are there any questions about the mooring committee meeting from any of the commissioners? Members of the public, any comment? About
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
About anything that we've discussed this evening? Mary Von Conta?
Yes, my address.
Yeah.
We need to come over here.
I have a question about this relatively lightweight but very expensive piece of equipment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, they may not be able to hear you over here.
And what is that?
Just talk to the microphone.
Oh, ooh, I need that. I have a bad voice. What happens to this lightweight, very expensive piece of equipment with all the attachments to it when we have a really, really ripped nor'easter or a hurricane? Do they come and take it out of there before that happens?
You're talking about the USGS buoy?
Yes, I am.
That's a good question. Brian, did you hear Mary's question? What happens to the buoy if we have a bad nor'easter or hurricane? Do they take it out?
That I don't know. That is a good question. I don't know. I can ask them what their practice is. I know they have a number of these. They've indicated that this is not new technology or new designs. This is something that they have frequently used, these structures. So I can ask that question.
Well, that is a very dangerous, excuse me for interrupting, but that's a very dangerous place in some of those storms, and it practically took out the outer beacon, one of those storms a few years back.
Right.
And it's a serious thing to think about.
Right.
And also boats have been tossed onto the rocks next to the dock at the end of the harbor, things like that. It's a very bad place.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Which you might consider when you're thinking about putting a dock out from Saco Point too. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Okay, that's my thought.
Thank you, Mary. Brian, did you hear the second part? Very dangerous spot?
Yes, and that's something I'll take into consideration when we, before I would issue a permit for them, confirm that this is going to hold and what is their contingency plan if it doesn't, or if a storm is coming, what do they do? How are they going to have so we don't have this thing blowing all over the place and into the channel or private property.
Great. So, anything else from members of the public or from the commissioners? Okay, hearing nothing, I need a motion to adjourn until 4:30.
So moved.
Jack has moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Bill seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. See you on
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
4:30.
Thank you.
I stand. I'm sorry.